The security camera caught them every time. Laughing teenagers vaulting her fence at midnight, splashing in her pool like they owned it. Margaret had asked nicely. She'd called their parents. She'd even called the police twice, but the kids kept coming back, bolder each time. Then one night she found beer bottles floating in the water and her patio furniture shattered. Something inside her snapped. She made a single phone call to her lawyer nephew, signed one document, and waited. When those kids climbed her fence the next Friday night, they had no idea they were about to lose everything that mattered. Margaret Foster stood at her kitchen window, her jaw tight as she watched the sunset paint the Arizona sky in shades of copper and rose. The view should have brought her peace. Instead, it filled her with a familiar dread that had become her nightly companion over the past 3 months. The pool in her backyard shimmered like a jewel, its surface perfectly still. She'd worked for 37 years as a nurse to afford this house, this sanctuary in the quiet Scottsdale neighborhood. Her husband Daniel had died 2 years ago, leaving her alone but financially secure. The pool had been his dream, installed the summer before his diagnosis. Now it was all she had left of their plans for retirement. And those kids were destroying it. Margaret dried her hands on a dish towel and moved to the back door, stepping onto the patio. The chlorine smell reminded her of Daniel, who had maintained the pool with meticulous care. She'd learned to do it herself after he passed, watching YouTube videos and calling the pool supply store with questions. Every chemical balance, every cleaned filter was an act of love and remembrance. The fence surrounding her property was 6 feet tall, solid wood painted a tasteful desert tan. It should have been enough. For the first year after Daniel died, it had been enough. Then the Henderson family moved in 3 doors down. Margaret had met Colleen Henderson at the Neighborhood Association meeting in March. A divorced mother of 3, Colleen worked long hours as a pharmaceutical sales rep and seemed perpetually distracted. Her kids ranged from 15 to 19, and they came with an entourage of friends who treated the quiet cul-de-sac like their personal playground. It started small, loud music on weekend nights, cars parked blocking driveways. Then Margaret woke one June morning to find wet footprints leading from her pool to the back fence, along with an empty vodka bottle floating among the leaves. She'd gone to Colleen's house that morning, knocked politely, and explained the situation. Colleen had been apologetic, promised to talk to her kids, offered to pay for any damages. Margaret declined the money, wanting only peace and respect. The promise lasted 1 week. Margaret checked her watch. 7:30 on a Friday evening. If the pattern held, they'd come around midnight. She'd installed security cameras after the second incident, discreet models mounted under the eaves. The footage was damning, clear views of 5 teenagers climbing her fence, stripping down to swimsuits they'd worn under their clothes, and partying in her pool until 2 or 3 in the morning. She'd shown the footage to Colleen. The woman had been mortified, grounded her kids, called the other parents. For 2 weeks, Margaret had slept peacefully. Then they came back, and this time they brought 10 friends. Margaret had called the police that night. Officer Bryan had been sympathetic but explained the limitations. Trespassing required the perpetrators to be caught in the act or for the homeowner to press formal charges. The kids always scattered before the police arrived. Filing charges required court dates, lawyer fees, and no guarantee of meaningful consequences for minors. She'd tried being friendly, tried being firm. She'd posted no trespassing signs. She'd even stood in her backyard at midnight, confronting them directly. They'd laughed at her, called her names she refused to repeat even in her own mind, and told her to mind her own business. 2 weeks ago, she'd woken to find her patio furniture smashed, the glass table shattered into 1,000 pieces. Spray paint marred her fence, crude insults directed at the old lady who couldn't take a joke. The pool pump had been damaged, costing her $800 to repair. Colleen had cried when Margaret showed her the damage. She'd written a check for $2,000, begged forgiveness, sworn her children would face real consequences. Margaret had accepted the check and hoped for the best. Last Friday night, they'd come back. Margaret walked inside and locked the door behind her. She moved through the house she'd shared with Daniel, past the photos of their wedding, their travels, the life they'd built together. In the study, she sat at his desk and opened her laptop. The email from her nephew Travis was still on the screen. Travis was a lawyer in Phoenix, specializing in property law and personal injury cases. Margaret had called him on Sunday, the morning after the latest invasion, her voice shaking with rage and exhaustion. Travis had listened without interruption, asked detailed questions, and requested she send him all the security footage, photos of the damage, copies of her previous reports to police, and documentation of every conversation with Colleen Henderson and the other parents. His response had arrived on Wednesday. Margaret read it again, her hand steady now, her decision made. The plan was simple, legal, and devastating. Travis had outlined it in clinical terms, but Margaret understood the implications. She would not confront the teenagers again. She would not call their parents. She would not call the police unless absolutely necessary for documentation. Instead, she would allow them to trespass one more time. She would document everything with perfect clarity. Then Travis would file a comprehensive lawsuit against every teenager involved and their parents, seeking damages for property destruction, emotional distress, and creating an unsafe environment. He would also file for a restraining order that would extend to the entire Henderson property, effectively forcing Colleen to move or control her children perfectly. The Nevada family, whose son was one of the ringleaders, would face additional action. Travis had discovered they were renting their home and violating the lease terms by allowing destructive behavior from their household. Their landlord, once informed, would have grounds for eviction. The Ray's family would face scrutiny regarding their 17-year-old daughter, who'd been filmed drinking in multiple videos. Child Protective Services would receive an anonymous tip with evidence. Margaret had hesitated when Travis explained this part. She wasn't vindictive by nature. But then she remembered standing in her backyard at 3 in the morning, tears streaming down her face as she looked at Daniel's broken dream, and her hesitation vanished. She clicked on the security camera feed. The backyard was empty, the pool lights off as she preferred them. She decided against draining the pool or covering it, anything that might signal a change and scare them off. Tonight needed to happen. Her phone buzzed, a text from Travis. Everything in place. Remember, don't confront them. Let them enter, document, and leave. We need them confident and careless. Margaret typed back a single word, understood. She made herself dinner, a simple salad with grilled chicken, and ate while watching the news. The normalcy of the routine was comforting. At 9, she took her evening medication and settled into her reading chair with a mystery novel. She set an alarm on her phone for 11:30. The hours passed slowly. Margaret tried to focus on the book but found herself reading the same page repeatedly. Finally, the alarm chimed. She rose, checked the camera feeds on her laptop, and saw only darkness and stillness. She changed into comfortable clothes and made a pot of coffee. If this was going to be a long night, she'd be ready. At 11:53, motion triggered the camera alerts. Margaret pulled up the feed and watched as shapes moved along the back fence line. One by one, they came over. She counted them. 7 teenagers, including Colleen's oldest son Tyler and Marcus Ray's, whose parents had ignored her complaints completely. They moved through her yard like they belonged there, laughing and shoving each other. Someone had brought a Bluetooth speaker, and music started pounding across the quiet neighborhood. Margaret winced, thinking of her neighbors, but Travis had specifically told her to let it happen. Tyler stripped off his shirt and dove into the pool. The others followed, their whoops and shouts echoing off the houses. Margaret watched the cameras, her face expressionless, as they opened beer cans and began drinking. She noted the time stamps. the clear faces caught in the pool lights that one of them had turned on, the evidence mounting with every passing minute. At 12:30, two more kids arrived. They'd brought liquor, and Margaret watched as bottles were passed around. Someone suggested playing music louder. Another kid jumped off her pool deck railing, nearly missing the water. Margaret's phone rang. She answered it without taking her eyes from the screen. "Mrs. Foster, it's Officer Bryant. We've received noise complaints from your address. Are you aware of a disturbance?" "I am," Margaret said calmly. "Teenagers are trespassing in my pool again. I have them on camera." "We're sending a unit. Please stay inside and don't engage." "I have no intention of engaging," Margaret said. The police arrived 14 minutes later. Margaret watched through the window as two officers approached her fence, flashlights cutting through the darkness. The teenagers scattered like cockroaches, climbing the fence and running in all directions. But it didn't matter. Margaret had 47 minutes of high-definition footage showing every face, every illegal drink, every act of trespassing and vandalism to her property. One kid had kicked over her newly replaced patio chair. Another had urinated in her flower bed. Officer Bryant knocked on her front door. Margaret let him inside, offered coffee, and pulled up the footage on her laptop. "Mrs. Foster," he said after watching for several minutes, "this is extensive documentation. Are you planning to press charges this time?" "My lawyer will be handling everything," Margaret said. "But yes, I need this documented in a police report." Bryant nodded slowly. "I understand your frustration. I've been to this address 4 times now." "5," Margaret corrected gently. "You weren't on duty for one of the calls." He looked uncomfortable. These kids need to learn consequences. Their parents clearly aren't teaching them. "That's about to change," Margaret said. She gave her statement, signed the paperwork, and walked Bryant to the door. After he left, she emailed the evening's footage to Travis, along with the police report number Bryant had provided. Travis called at 2 in the morning. "This is perfect," he said, and she could hear the satisfaction in his voice. "I'm drafting the complaints tonight. We'll file first thing Monday morning." "How bad will it be?" Margaret asked. "For them, very. We have documented evidence of repeated trespassing, property damage, underage drinking, and harassment. The parents have been notified multiple times and failed to act. We're looking at 5-figure settlements from each family, restraining orders, and possible criminal charges for the older teens who are legal adults." Margaret thought of Tyler Henderson, who just turned 19 in July. Colleen's son is an adult. "Yes," Travis said, "which means he can be charged as one. Same with Marcus Reyes and Jenny Blackwell. The others are minors, but their parents will bear civil liability." Margaret sat in the darkness of her kitchen, looking out at the pool. The lights were still on, and the water's surface was choppy from the recent activity. She should feel triumphant. Instead, she felt tired and sad that it had come to this. "Do it," she said finally. "File everything." "You're sure? Once we start this, the neighborhood dynamics will change permanently." "They changed when those kids decided my property was theirs to destroy," Margaret said. "I tried kindness. I tried patience. They've made their choice, and now I'm making mine." Travis was quiet for a moment. "Aunt Margaret, I'm proud of you for standing up for yourself." "Your Uncle Daniel would have handled this months ago," she said softly. "Uncle Daniel would have done the same thing you're doing. He believed in consequences and accountability. You're honoring him by defending what he built." After they hung up, Margaret finally went to bed, but sleep evaded her. She lay in the darkness, thinking about Monday morning, about the lawsuits that would be filed, about the chaos that would follow. She thought about Colleen Henderson, who would come to her door in tears, about the Reyes family, who would lose their home, about the Blackwell family, whose daughter Jenny would face criminal charges that could impact her college applications. Had she been wrong to let it escalate this far? Should she have tried something else? Then she remembered standing in her backyard 3 weeks ago, looking at the word bitch spray painted across her fence in 3-foot-tall letters. She remembered the fear she'd felt when one of the boys had grabbed her arm and shoved her, telling her to get back in her house before she got hurt. She remembered the sound of her patio table shattering, the glass sparkling across the concrete like malicious stars. No, she hadn't been wrong. She'd been patient far beyond what anyone should have expected. Margaret closed her eyes and eventually slept. Saturday morning arrived with brilliant sunshine. Margaret made breakfast, watered her plants, and tried to maintain her normal routine. She was cleaning the pool, skimming out the debris left from the night before, when she saw Colleen Henderson approaching across the lawn. Margaret straightened, net in hand, and waited. Colleen's face was blotchy with tears. "Margaret, I'm so sorry. The police came by this morning. They said Tyler and his friends were here again last night." "They were," Margaret said quietly. "I don't know what to do anymore. I've grounded him, taken away his car, his phone, everything. He waits until I'm asleep and sneaks out. I'm a single mother working 60 hours a week. I can't watch him every second." Margaret set down the pool net. "Colleen, I know you're trying, but trying isn't enough anymore." "What does that mean?" "It means I've hired a lawyer. The lawsuits will be filed Monday morning." Colleen went pale. "Lawsuits? Margaret, please, we can work this out. I'll pay for everything. I'll make Tyler apologize. I'll send him to military school if I have to." "It's beyond that now," Margaret said. "Your son and his friends have trespassed, vandalized my property, threatened me physically, and showed me their complete disregard for boundaries, respect, and basic human decency. They've had months to learn. They've chosen not to." "Margaret, please," Colleen's voice broke. "Tyler's starting college in 3 weeks. A lawsuit, criminal charges that could ruin his future." "He should have thought of that before he ruined my peace," Margaret said. "I'm sorry, Colleen, I really am, but this conversation is over. Anything further goes through my attorney." She turned and walked back to her house, closing the door firmly behind her. Through the window, she watched Colleen stand in the yard for several minutes before finally walking away. Margaret's hands shook as she made tea. She'd never been cruel, never wanted to hurt anyone. But she'd also never been a doormat, and she refused to start now. The rest of the weekend passed tensely. Margaret saw curtains moving in windows as neighbors watched and whispered. She received a text from Barbara Chen, who lived across the street, asking if everything was okay. Margaret replied that it would be soon. Sunday afternoon, Marcus Ray's father appeared at her door. Hector Reyes was a big man, a construction foreman with shoulders like a linebacker. He'd ignored her previous attempts at conversation, acting like the trespassing was a joke and boys would be boys. Now his face was hard with anger. "You called the police on my son," he said without preamble. "Your son was trespassing on my property," Margaret replied calmly. "Again. He's a kid. Kids make mistakes. He's 17, old enough to know better. And I've spoken to you about this 3 times, Mr. Reyes. You chose to do nothing. So you're going to sue us." Colleen told everyone about your threats. "They're not threats. The lawsuits will be filed tomorrow morning. I suggest you contact a lawyer." Hector's face darkened. "You're making a big mistake, lady. My family doesn't forget things like this." Margaret felt a chill but kept her voice steady. "Is that a threat, Mr. Reyes? Because I'm recording this conversation, and threatening a woman in her 70s would not help your legal situation." She held up her phone, the recording app clearly visible. Hector stared at it, then at her, his jaw working. "This isn't over," he finally said. "You're right," Margaret agreed. "It's not. It's just beginning. And every word you've said here will be included in the documentation. Have a good day, Mr. Reyes." She closed the door and locked it, then immediately sent the recording to Travis with a brief explanation. He called within minutes. "That's witness intimidation," Travis said grimly. I'm adding it to the complaints and filing for an immediate restraining order against Hector Reyes. This protects you legally and shows the court exactly what kind of people we're dealing with. I don't want to escalate unnecessarily, Margaret said. Aunt Margaret, he threatened you. That's already escalated. We're protecting you now, and we're going to make sure everyone understands there are real consequences for this behavior. Monday morning, Travis filed 6 separate lawsuits in Maricopa County Superior Court. The first named Tyler Henderson and Colleen Henderson, seeking damages for trespassing, property destruction, and emotional distress, with a total claim of $47,000. The second named Marcus Reyes and his parents, with similar charges plus the witness intimidation from Hector, seeking $62,000 and an immediate restraining order. The third through sixth named the other families whose children had been documented on camera, each seeking between $30,000 and $50,000 depending on the extent of their children's involvement. Additionally, Travis filed criminal complaints against Tyler Henderson, Marcus Reyes, and Jenny Blackwell, all of whom were legal adults. The charges included trespassing, vandalism, and providing alcohol to minors. The Scottsdale Police Department, armed with Margaret's extensive documentation, had no choice but to process the complaints. By Monday afternoon, the neighborhood was in chaos. Margaret stayed inside, watching through her windows as lawyers arrived at various houses, as parents shouted at each other in driveways, as the teenagers involved were seen being driven away by their furious parents. Barbara Chin texted her, "What have you done?" Margaret replied simply, "Protected my home." Colleen Henderson appeared on her doorstep again, this time with a lawyer in tow. Margaret refused to open the door, instead directing them to contact Travis. They stood on her porch for 10 minutes, the lawyer explaining through the door that they wanted to settle immediately, that they'd pay whatever she wanted, that this was destroying their lives. Margaret said nothing. The lawyer finally left a business card wedged in her doorframe and departed with Colleen, who was sobbing openly. That evening, Margaret received a certified letter from the Henderson family's attorney. They were offering $50,000 to drop all charges and lawsuits, along with a written apology from Tyler and a guarantee he would never come near her property again. Margaret scanned the document and sent it to Travis. He called immediately. "Don't take it. They're panicking because Tyler's college found out about the criminal charges. If he's convicted, his acceptance will be rescinded. They're trying to make this go away fast." "Isn't that what I want?" Margaret asked. "You want justice, not a quick payoff. We have them cornered. The other families are watching to see what happens here. If we settle cheap, it sends the message that money solves everything and there are no real consequences. We hold firm, go to court if necessary, and make sure everyone learns what happens when you mess with people's property and safety." Margaret thought about it. What if Tyler loses his college acceptance? That's a consequence of his choices, not yours. You didn't make him trespass repeatedly. You didn't make him vandalize your property. You didn't make him threaten you. He did all of that. Now he's learning that actions have consequences. "All right," Margaret said. "No settlement, we proceed." The next 2 weeks were brutal. The local news picked up the story. Scottsdale woman sues teenagers over pool trespassing. The coverage was split. Some portrayed Margaret as a vindictive old woman destroying young lives over harmless fun. Others depicted her as a victim, finally standing up to out-of-control teenagers and negligent parents. Margaret stopped reading the comments online. The vitriol from strangers who didn't know the full story was overwhelming. She received hate mail, people telling her she was heartless, that she was ruining futures over a few pool parties. Someone left a bag of garbage on her driveway with a note calling her a bitter old hag. But she also received support. Barbara Chen organized a neighborhood meeting where several longtime residents stood up and talked about their own issues with the Henderson kids and their friends. The constant noise, the vandalism, the disrespect. Many admitted they'd been afraid to speak up, worried about retaliation or being labeled as troublemakers. An older man named Gerald Timmons revealed his car had been keyed twice in the past year, and he was certain it was the same group of kids, but had no proof. A young mother named Aisha Williams described finding beer cans in her yard and being afraid to let her toddlers play outside. The meeting shifted something in the neighborhood dynamics. Margaret wasn't alone anymore. She was the one brave enough to stand up. The Ray's family received their eviction notice. The landlord, horrified by the documentation of illegal activities and property damage at a neighboring home, invoked the lease's good behavior clause. They had 60 days to vacate. Hector Reyes tried to fight it, but the restraining order against him for threatening Margaret was already in place, and his son's involvement was documented beyond dispute. The family began house hunting in a cheaper neighborhood. Jenny Blackwell's parents hired an expensive attorney and managed to get her charges reduced to a misdemeanor with community service, but 3 colleges withdrew their acceptance offers. She'd have to attend community college instead, a devastating blow to her plans for a university education. Tyler Henderson's case was the most dramatic. His attorney tried everything, claiming he was influenced by older friends, arguing he had mental health issues that needed treatment instead of punishment, even suggesting Margaret had somehow entrapped him by not securing her pool better. Judge Patricia Valdez shut down every argument with cold precision. "Mr. Henderson is 19 years old," she said during a hearing Margaret attended. "He is legally an adult. He made conscious choices to repeatedly trespass on private property, to vandalize that property, to consume illegal substances, and to harass a homeowner who asked him to stop. This court does not accept excuses. This court demands accountability." Tyler was convicted of criminal trespassing and vandalism. He received a suspended jail sentence, 3 years of probation, 200 hours of community service, and $5,000 in fines and restitution. His college acceptance was rescinded. Tyler Henderson would be staying home, attending community college while working to pay off his legal debts. Colleen Henderson sold her house in September. The day the moving truck arrived, she appeared at Margaret's door one final time. "I hope you're happy," Colleen said, her voice flat with exhaustion and grief. "You've destroyed my son's life." Margaret met her eyes steadily. "I defended my home and my peace. Your son destroyed his own life by refusing to respect boundaries and face consequences. I'm sorry it came to this, Colleen. I genuinely am. But I gave him and you every chance to make different choices. He's just a kid who made mistakes. He's an adult who made conscious, repeated decisions to hurt someone else. Those are different things." Colleen turned away without another word. Margaret watched the moving truck pull away 3 hours later, taking the Henderson family to a new neighborhood where, hopefully, they'd make better choices. The lawsuits against the other families settled one by one over the following months. The Ray's family paid $38,000 and issued a formal written apology. Marcus was enrolled in a military-style boarding school in northern Arizona. The Blackwell family paid $42,000 and agreed to pay for all of Margaret's security system upgrades. Jenny wrote a 5-page apology letter that seemed genuine in its remorse. The other families settled for amounts ranging from $15,000 to $30,000, depending on their children's level of involvement. In total, Margaret received over $200,000 in settlements and court-ordered restitution. She used $50,000 to repair and upgrade her property, including a new fence with security features, updated cameras with night vision and facial recognition, and a comprehensive alarm system. She donated $75,000 to the Scottsdale Boys and Girls Club, earmarked specifically for programs teaching respect, accountability, and consequences to teenagers. The remaining $75,000 went into a trust that would fund a college scholarship for young people in her neighborhood who demonstrated good character and community involvement. By December, life had settled into a new normal. The neighborhood was quieter. New families moved into the Henderson and Ray's houses, people with young children who appreciated the peaceful environment. They introduced themselves to Margaret, brought her cookies, and thanked her for standing up for the neighborhood standards. Margaret's days returned to the routine she cherished. Morning coffee on the patio, reading in the afternoon sun, evening swims in the pool that Daniel had loved. She thought of him often, especially on nights when the pool lights turned the water into liquid sapphire. "I protected it," she whispered to the stars. "I protected what we built." But the peace came with a cost Margaret hadn't fully anticipated. 3 days before Christmas, she received a disturbing letter. No return address, mailed from Phoenix. Inside was a single sheet of paper with words cut from magazines and newspapers, like something from a crime show. "You ruined our lives. Payback is coming." Margaret's hands trembled as she read it. She called Travis immediately, then the police. Officer Bryant came to take the report, his face grave. "Mrs. Foster, I want you to take this seriously. Most of these threats are just anger with no follow-through, but we can't assume that." "What should I do?" "Keep your security system active. Vary your routine if possible. Don't answer the door without checking who it is first. And call us immediately if anything seems off." Margaret agreed, but the letter planted a seed of fear that grew over the following days. She found herself checking the cameras obsessively, jumping at every sound, seeing threats in shadows. On Christmas Eve, she was decorating the small tree she'd put up in the living room when the doorbell rang. She checked the camera and saw a teenager she didn't recognize, holding what looked like a package. "Delivery for Margaret Foster," the kid called out. Margaret hesitated. She hadn't ordered anything, but it was Christmas Eve and maybe one of her friends had sent something. She opened the door but kept the security chain in place. "You can leave it on the porch," she said. The kid shrugged and set down a wrapped box, then walked away. Margaret waited until he was gone before opening the door fully and retrieving the package. It was heavy, wrapped in cheerful red paper with a silver bow. No card, no indication of who sent it. Margaret's instincts screamed warning. She carried the box to her garage and called the police non-emergency line. "I received an unexpected package, and I'm concerned given recent threats," she explained. The dispatcher took her seriously. 2 officers arrived within 20 minutes, followed by a bomb detection K-9 unit. The dog alerted on the package. Margaret watched from her living room window as the bomb squad carefully transported the box to a containment vehicle. An hour later, Officer Bryant came to her door with a grim expression. "Mrs. Foster, that package contained a homemade incendiary device. If you'd opened it normally, it would have caused severe burns and potentially started a fire." Margaret felt the room spin. Someone had tried to hurt her, seriously hurt her, maybe even kill her. "The wrapping and construction suggests someone with limited experience but access to internet instructions," Bryant continued. "We're treating this as attempted assault with a deadly weapon. We'll be investigating everyone connected to your previous cases." The investigation consumed the week between Christmas and New Year's. Detectives interviewed the families she'd sued, their extended relatives, friends of the teenagers involved. The delivery kid was located and identified the person who paid him $20 to drop off the package, a teenager matching Marcus Ray's description. Marcus was arrested at his boarding school and brought back to Scottsdale in handcuffs. His parents, still bitter about their eviction and the lawsuit, initially tried to claim he was being framed. Then the evidence emerged. Marcus had kept a journal, found during a search of his dorm room, detailing his rage at Margaret and his plans to make her pay. He'd researched bomb-making online, practiced with smaller devices in the desert, and finally built the incendiary package with help from a friend he'd met at school. The friend was also arrested. Both faced federal charges for mailing an explosive device. Hector Reyes showed up at the police station while his son was being processed. According to the officers present, he broke down completely, sobbing and begging them to understand his son was just angry, just acting out, that Margaret had pushed them too far. "She destroyed our family," Hector reportedly said. "What did she expect?" The detective's response was documented in the case file. "She expected you to teach your son not to trespass and vandalize her property. Instead, you taught him that anger justifies violence. That's on you, not her." Margaret learned all of this from Travis, who had become more than just her lawyer. He'd become a protective presence, calling daily to check on her, ensuring she felt safe. "Marcus is looking at serious federal time," Travis told her. "The charges carry a mandatory minimum of 5 years, possibly up to 20 depending on intent and circumstances." "He's just a kid," Margaret said softly. "A stupid, angry kid. He's 17, old enough to know that sending a bomb to someone's house is wrong. Aunt Margaret, you can't feel guilty about this. You didn't make him do it. You defended your property legally and appropriately. His choices and his parents' failures led to this." Margaret knew Travis was right, but the knowledge didn't ease the weight in her chest. A 17-year-old boy was going to prison because of a chain of events that started with pool parties. Except that wasn't true, she reminded herself. Marcus was going to prison because he built a bomb and tried to hurt someone. The pool parties were just the beginning of a pattern of escalating bad decisions, enabled by parents who refused to see their child clearly. Still, the night before New Year's Eve, Margaret stood in her backyard and looked at the pool, and wondered if it was worth it. All the money, all the legal victories, all the neighborhood peace meant nothing if she lived in fear. If every package was a potential threat, if every shadow held danger. She thought about selling the house, moving to a retirement community, leaving all of this behind. Then she remembered Daniel's face the day they'd finished installing the pool, his joy at achieving a dream they'd worked toward for decades. She remembered his stubborn insistence that people should stand up for what's right, even when it's hard. Margaret dried her tears and went inside. She wasn't leaving. This was her home, paid for with 37 years of hard work and sacrifice. She wouldn't let fear or anger or threats drive her away. The new year arrived with surprising gentleness. Marcus Reyes pled guilty to federal charges in exchange for a reduced sentence of 8 years. His parents, devastated and finally understanding the magnitude of their failures, moved out of state to be closer to the prison where he'd serve his time. The neighborhood settled into genuine peace. The new families proved respectful and friendly. A neighborhood watch program was established, with Margaret as an honorary founding member. In March, Barbara Chen organized a spring block party. Margaret initially declined, uncomfortable with being the center of attention. Barbara insisted. "You saved this neighborhood," Barbara said firmly. "People need to say thank you." The party was held on a Saturday afternoon, with tables set up in the cul-de-sac and children playing in the street. Margaret arrived reluctantly, expecting awkwardness or resentment. Instead, she was greeted with genuine warmth. Families thanked her for standing up when others were afraid. Parents told her they felt safe letting their kids play outside again. Gerald Timmons presented her with a plaque reading "Neighborhood Guardian." Margaret cried, overwhelmed by the support she'd never realized existed. As spring turned to summer, Margaret found herself healing in unexpected ways. She joined a grief support group and began processing Daniel's death more fully. She volunteered at the Boys and Girls Club, working with the programs her donation funded. One afternoon in June, she met a teenage girl named Sophia who was struggling with peer pressure.